Welcome to the CEO's Guide to Marketing. I'm Seth Matlins. I've spent my career in marketing, both in and advising the C-suite, and I'm now the managing director of the Forbes CMO network. So look, there's data showing that if I were taller, I'd have a much better shot at being CEO of a major company, which makes me wonder how different things might be if my mom hadn't been 5'2". More relevantly, there's also data showing that if I were the CEO of a major company, I'd be one of only 10% with any marketing background whatsoever. Fully 90% of the chief executives of the world's largest companies have none, which in turn makes me wonder how much more stakeholder value could be created and enterprise growth driven if more did, if more understood how marketing works, how it doesn't, what to expect, what not to, and on what timeline. But because they don't have the experience and often don't understand, despite sometimes thinking that they do, too often, too many of today's CEOs and CFOs are suboptimal stewards of the resources given to their chief marketing officers in order to drive sustainable, profitable growth. Obviously, this serves no one and no company, but it does create the opportunity and obligation to increase the C-suite's marketing literacy, which brings me to this podcast in service of creating more growth and stakeholder value. Through a series of candid and connected conversations, we're hoping to raise the C-suite's marketing IQ and ensure CMOs are best positioned to do their jobs, which is to create and capture the demand that drives growth and value. With that, let's get into it. I'm old enough that I remember when, in a predominantly CPG world, product and brand were inextricably linked parts of the marketer's remit. And I've been thinking a lot about how in a tech-driven world, they become increasingly separated organizationally. Engineers and product developers here, marketers over there. So wanted to talk to someone who understands product marketing arguably as well as anyone ever and better than almost anyone ever. For this episode, I'm talking with Lorraine Twohill, the longtime CMO at Google, where she manages a global team responsible for telling the story of Google's brand and bringing to life how its many tools, products and services both, help millions of businesses grow. Her teams oversee global marketing for some of the most used brands in the world, including Google Search, Android Pixel, YouTube, Google Cloud, and the company's expanding suite of AI tools. Lorraine's a native of Carlow, Ireland, and among a long list of accolades, was inducted into the Forbes CMO Hall of Fame in 2022. I should also note that I first met Lorraine in 2011 when I interviewed with her for the CMO job at YouTube, which, as any casual review of my own LinkedIn profile will make clear, was a job I did not get. I wanted to talk to Lorraine anyway, not just because she's an industry legend, but because there are few who understand product marketing and marketing at a product-first company better than she does. Let's get into it. All right, Lorraine, as you know, part of what we do, every one of our CEO's Guide to Marketing episodes is we ask our guests to give us fill-in-the-blank answers to 10 questions in less than 5 minutes. So yes, this is the lightning round, and we just start it right up front. Okay, you ready?
Yes, sir.
I mean, I'm not really going to time you, but I do have high expectations.
I'm under pressure now, Seth. I'm feeling a little under pressure now, Seth. I need to have my coffee.
All right, let's go. You ready? Marketing is?
A human connection.
Oh, I love that. A human connection between what and what?
Well, it's in service of the value you create and communicate to your customers.
Yeah.
But it's a human connection between a company and your customer.
Love that. A brand is?
A promise.
The
promise you have to keep.
Yeah. Now, what happens when you don't keep it? Because inevitably, sometimes...
It's hard to keep it.
Yeah.
It's, in fact, probably the hardest thing of all, because you've got to deliver it through your product, through your customer experience. You've got to deliver it through your team. So if you damage, break that promise, it affects trust. It affects your user trust.
I think it's so interesting, and I'm gonna not count this time against your 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
But it, you make such a good point that I think so many marketers missed, which is it is delivered through your team, through customer service, through every touch point anyone has. With brand product.
And it's not even just telling marketers, and again, this is not counting against my time, but it's
I'll be the judge of that.
You're the boss. You're the boss today. It's the whole company.
Yeah.
It's part of your internal job.
Exactly.
It's to tell the whole company, listen, no matter what we do over here, if we screw up over here, this really is breaking the promise that we've made.
Well, that's one of the things, you and I have talked about this over time, but what was once in a CMO's quote-unquote control is no longer. Right? As marketing's become democratized, decentralized, oftentimes siloed, which we'll get into, everybody is a marketer in some respect and fashion, or everybody has responsibility for brand. I think that's a better way to say it.
Everyone has responsibility for brand. I do think that everyone thinks they're the marketer.
Yes,
I've always
and that's
told
the
my
important
team,
distinction.
whenever you're presenting to the management team of the company, any other presentation will get quite deep into the presentation, but in marketing, they're interrupting by the agenda.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I went to school, so I have an opinion on education. So,
Yeah.
you know, everyone has an opinion on marketing. Right? They've seen ads.
I've used this line, just because you've seen Blue Ivy dance at a Beyonce show doesn't mean you can dance.
Doesn't mean you can dance. Yes.
All right. So actually, I think we're kind of touching on the next two questions. What's the hardest part of being a CMO?
I think for me, you know, it's learning how and when to say no. And that might mean to a product manager, no, you can't have your 17 features in one spot. Or it might mean saying no to all of the crazy asks coming in the door so that you can focus on the bigger wins. Or it might be saying no to the short-term pressure versus the long-term benefit. But you have to learn how to say no.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Especially in a world of unlimited opportunity, massive noise, but scarce resources.
Exactly.
Whether those resources are capital, time, or human.
Couldn't agree more.
What, from your perspective, is the hardest part of being a CEO?
I think driving change, trying to change a company, I think trying to change strategy while simultaneously keeping morale high and keeping the mojo strong, keeping the culture strong in a company. Like keeping the culture while driving change is very hard.
Yeah. I mean, because culture should be a part of the change agenting.
Yes.
Right?
Humans don't like change.
No.
And no matter how much you tell them you're joining a company that's a high performance company that has tremendous agility and tremendous change, humans like to know the plan.
Well, but there's a difference between not liking change and wanting to know the plan, right? Because it's, of course, the leadership's responsibility to make sure everybody understands, if not the plan, then the reason why.
Yes.
Right? But, you know, one of the things that I talk a lot and think a lot about is kind of the architecture of the brain hasn't changed in thousands of years, right? We're still primed to survive. And I kind of have come up with this, to call it a thesis overstates it, but I think the reason we don't like change, the reason we adhere to the status quo, speaking broadly, even when we know it doesn't serve us, is because it didn't kill us. And it's literally like we're walking down the plains wearing a loincloth, and if that lion, you know, we knew to be afraid of that lion, but if that, you know, kitten was there, like, it didn't kill me. Right?
Yeah.
The status quo didn't kill us.
The folks who took the risk didn't come back.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oftentimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Next question. Question number 6. We're halfway through. Brands and businesses grow when?
When you innovate, when you take risks, experiment, have a culture of experimentation, make mistakes, learn, have a learning agenda. We're all students.
Back to the status quo starting to be a killer, a category, not a category killer, but a brand of business
Well, certainly
killer, right?
complacency is.
Yeah.
Yes.
By the way, that's a great distinction between the status quo
because
and
sometimes your status
complacency.
quo might be very good and it's about maintaining it in a healthy way.
Yeah,
and,
you're
you know,
absolutely right.
rather than changing everything.
Yeah. All right, well, let me ask you, I think it's the inverse. Brands and businesses die when?
When you stop listening. When you stop listening to your customers, when you lose trust, when you stop caring about learning, having a learning agenda, when you get complacent.
Yeah. Complacency is a killer, of course. Well, actually, so good segue to the next question. Knowing that this is a very broad question, the answer depends on a million variables. Competitive advantage comes from?
In my view, because of where I've grown up in marketing, I think it's differentiated product. I think you have to start with the offering. So from I think differentiated product comes first, and then I think a strong brand that people trust. I think you need both of those things.
Yeah.
I think you can't get there with just one of them.
Yeah. How do you measure for true incrementality? So to put it in the context of this, you measure for true incrementality by?
Experimentation and testing, A/B testing,
Regressions.
control groups.
Right.
Eliminating cities, countries,
Right.
so you can truly understand the lift.
So it's on and off, and off,
and
different variables.
Testing.
Okay, so speaking across the landscape, and not, of course, about Google, if you could wave a magic wand and immediately address one C-suite misunderstanding about marketing and marketers, what would it be?
Well, I think this probably sounds obvious, but that marketing is a really important, not nice to have, but essential long-term strategic investment that drives real business impact versus a short-term, quick win, quick fix expense.
How do you think we've gotten to a place where that even needs to be said? Because I agree, it absolutely needs to be said, and that it does just blows my freaking mind.
Well, I think it's back to your previous question about incrementality and measurement. That's always been a challenge for us. Is we're taking on a lot of companies' investment, and we have to prove the impact, and so that's a big part of the job, and continuing to demonstrate that. And I do think you need to have enough power in a company to convince the company to back your thinking for enough time to be able to build a rigorous and robust measurement framework. It doesn't happen in a quarter. It's over time that you build in the learning, the knowledge, the models, the framework to actually be able to predict and prove the real business impact you're driving. It just takes a few years to get that in place, and it gets better each year. Like, it gets better over time. So it's optimization is a critical part of it. And so you need the permission to go and get that hard work done so you can really demonstrate the real impact you're driving.
I also think there's something so super important in what you said, which is, with optimization being kind of SOP, right? If you're not optimizing, back to your point about complacency and the status quo, right? And I wonder if it also requires a reframing by marketers internally of when things don't work, when things go awry. Because while it may not serve the moment, it can absolutely serve the learning for optimization.
I'm a big believer in under-promising and over-delivering.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we are our own worst enemies because we're big believers in the highlights, and here's why it's going to be great, and we're trying to sell hard. Yeah. You actually do need to manage expectations and bring people with you.
Yeah, that was how I got my wife. I under-promised and barely over-delivered.
We need to ask her.
Yeah, fair. All right, last question before we get into it, but it's the perfect question for segueing into the conversation. The relationship between a product or a service and a brand is?
Between a product and a brand is symbiotic. I don't think you can have one without the other. Okay,
great. So that takes me to a quote that I think is perhaps Bill Birnbach's. I'll fix it if I got it wrong in the notes to the podcast. But he said, every brand can have a product at its core. Not every product has a brand at its core. For somebody who has been marketing inside Google, right, one of the great product companies in the history of companies, how do you ensure and how do you work with your product teams and a culture of innovation to ensure that a brand is getting carried through and baked in, not just appended when engineering throws it over a proverbial transom?
It's a great question, something we work hard at every single day. And in our company, and I think in many, especially tech companies, you have a part of marketing that I consider to be almost the most important part of marketing, which is product marketing. And that is the team who sit day in, day out with the product managers and the engineers. They're in all of their core meetings, involved from the moment an idea gets a code name, a project name, bringing insights and research, bringing points of view.
What are the odds that the next product innovation at Google could be codenamed Seth?
Well, no one will know. That's the key thing.
I will know. Sorry, I interrupted. Please.
No problem. I'll give them that feedback. That would be my one contribution in the next product meeting. Sometimes that is the contribution. Is what are we naming the project? But and they care deeply about that. By the way, a lot of thought will go into it. So, but I think it's being in those meetings, being in the room where it happens, all the way through, long before launch. Certainly, when I first joined, typically marketing were pulled in like a week before launch. Hi, we need a name for this thing. We need a blog post. We need a video, ideally with the product manager in it, telling you what this thing does. And that's just not, that is not a recipe for success. So you've got to get involved way, way earlier, be in the room, add value in the room, bring in insights, bring in research, champion the customer, champion the user, have a deep, deep, deep knowledge of the product so that you have a feel for what features, new features would be successful, what use cases will drive more usage, what scenarios and features and use cases that matter the most to your customers, so that you can really inform in those sessions, in those meetings, and really add value.
I have two questions coming out of that. I'm going to ask the second one first because it's most direct, which is if product marketing needs to be sitting with them from the moment it's codenamed, what role does the product team play, the engineer, the technologist, whomever, in campaign development? Do they get to sit in too and kind of say, that doesn't actually feel like what we're trying to communicate? Do they, or is their job done on the engineering side, and then it's up to the professionals, as it were?
Well, they certainly have a strong point of view, and they know their product best. So I like having them not sit in through the whole process, but I like checking in with them at the beginning of the process, saying, we believe, and again, this is really where product marketing's job is. The product management team trusts the product marketers to actually work with the go-to-market teams and the brand teams to nail the product. But I do like to bring them in at the beginning and say, hey, we're going to focus on these features, these use cases, these types of scenarios. Does that resonate?
Right.
And then I want at the end, what I say to my team is, look, I want them to be proud.
Yeah.
Like I want to do work so the product teams and the engineering teams want to show their families, want to go home and say, hey, look, this is my baby come to life. This is the world getting excited about something that I've killed myself on for weeks or months. And so for me, ultimately, if I often think of a lot of our external work as actually internal work, in that if I can show it internally to all of our engineers and product teams, and they are so excited about it, then I feel like, okay, we've nailed this. Let's go show the world.
Something I just want to reinforce is what you just said. A lot of our external work is internal work, and I think that is lost by so many.
But your toughest audience is internal, by the way.
And actually, I'm going to still get back to that other question, but it raises for me exactly what you just said. They're the toughest audience, I think, again, because of what we were chatting. I mean, tell me if you disagree, because of what we were chatting about before, which is they think they know marketing, but they don't really know marketing. And while they might know the product best, they don't know the customer best. They don't know how to communicate the essence of what matters most so that people will use and or share, right?
I agree in all of that, but they're also the most invested. They care so much. They really...
It is their baby.
And they want the company to be successful, and they want work out there that they're proud of, and they want, having done all the hard work to build these features, they want them to be successful. It's no point doing all this hard work if nobody uses or wants or buys the product.
Yeah.
So they're very, very invested in its success. So they want to know that we're going to nail it. We're going to get out there and get the world excited about this thing, whatever that thing is. So they have a strong point of view.
So one of the things you said a moment ago was that, when you first got there, there was a real divide, a divorce, if you will, or certainly an absence of integration from a process perspective as to when product marketing got involved.
Yeah.
What did it take you, and maybe even how long did it take you to begin to change that expectation and process? Because obviously you have, and obviously it's been a sea change for one of the most important companies in the world.
Well, first of all, I don't know that it was that there was a sort of division. It was more that a misunderstanding of the role marketing could play, or a belief that marketing's role was defined in a certain way. And I was lucky that when I joined in Europe, and it was at a time when we had basically just search. And then we had Google Maps coming and Gmail, and none of these products were rolled out outside of the US. And so what I learned very early on, very quickly, is that if you lean in on the product side of the house, if you help them get the products to a better place, for example, there were a bunch of features needed to be successful in European countries they were obvious to me. I could give that feedback to them. I hired folks who could sit with them literally at the computer and say, listen, you need these features, these features, these features. So I put, junior product marketers sat in with engineers saying, to be successful outside of the US, here's what it's going to take. And it was building that trust at the product level with the product teams, helping them be successful with their product so that we actually ship something that's fit for market. Before you even get into any conversations about what's marketing's role or what should we go do or what campaign should we run or what should we invest, it was literally just hands-on person with person building great products. And you build trust that way. And since then, any senior person I've hired in who's come from other marketing organizations, I have said to them, no matter how great a leader you are, no matter how great you are going out in the world and telling extraordinary stories and driving tremendous impact, if you in the room as an individual cannot add value with the product team on their product, which they deeply care about, in that room, in those meetings, you're not going to be successful here.
Yeah, there has to be a value exchange or you're just taking up space and time.
The following segment features paid content from RockRT.
Doug, from Rock's perspective, what's the C-suite need to better understand about what's right and wrong today?
Yeah, the most important thing to think about getting right is the customer experience. It's a golden opportunity to meet the consumer's expectation, and nowhere is this more important than at checkout. capitalizing on consumer desires. The checkout moment, the transaction moment offers a chance to blend time efficiency with contextual awareness to really bring things together in a more personalized and relevant way.
And that diminishes cart abandonment, I'm assuming.
Absolutely. In fact, 73% of consumers say that they often experience some form of frustration or barrier at checkout. And so when you think about leveraging Rock's technology, it really helps you to unlock the moment that matters most when customers are buying.
To learn more about how to unlock the transaction moment, go to RockRT, ROKT.com. That's RockRT, ROKT.com/Forbes.
Now back to our program.
What do you think a chief executive, a CFO, a board, anyone for that matter, who doesn't really understand, because, and it's because of an absence of experience, the difference between product-driven growth and brand-driven growth, because they are in fact different across categories, right? CPG might, speaking broadly, painting with a big brush, be more brand-driven. Though you and I, actually, I know you disagree.
I disagree.
So, you're going to talk about the chocolate chip cookies?
Well, I just think you need both. I think that I worry, and I get this question a lot, how do you decide between a product campaign and a brand campaign? I think that great work can be in service of both.
Has to be.
Has to be.
You don't have the resources for it not to be.
Yeah, and you're dividing, and every single piece of product work, and I do agree that, we're a product-first company, every piece of work that's in service of a product should also be in service of the brand. Just like we spoke about earlier, every touch point in the company is in service of the brand. So is every piece of work we put out in the world, which is effectively, ultimately, all you see is the work we do.
Yeah.
And each piece of it needs to be in service of the brand. And so that's you and I would have a strong point of view about which chocolate chip cookie we prefer. They're not all the same. So, there's the product piece and product differentiation. You can actually make better cookies. And then there's the brand piece and the story you want to tell around it.
So, in fact, chocolate chip cookies are a good example because there's a real tangible difference, right? Which is tastes good, doesn't taste good to me. But in a lot of categories, service and product, we're living at a time of good enough products and services,
Good
right?
enough, yeah.
Right, which is the difference between X and Y. It's just not meaningful to me, which is why I think it's something like, my data's a little old, but 80% of searches on Amazon for products are by category, not by brand. So in a world of good enough products and services, what is the role of brand from your perspective? Obviously, the product needs to be as good as it can be and the best that it is. But a lot of people may not understand the true distinction. And it may not matter. What's the role of brand?
Also, I agree with you. And I think also in some spaces and some businesses, it's easier switch. Like it's just moving across and picking a different product. In other cases, it's whether it's switching a bank account, switching phone, switching a subscription.
Switching costs can be super high.
Super high. So it's just good. There's good enough. Then there's switching costs are high in a lot of categories. And then there's just the power of the habit and the default.
I would have switched. I'm not even kidding. I had the most frustrating customer experience with my cell provider where it took an hour and a half to get a shipping label.
Yeah.
And it was ridiculous. I would have dropped them like a hot potato, except for the switching costs.
It's very painful.
It was just going to cost me more time. And so, but I digress. Yeah, keep going.
But we do have to, part of the job is to fight the power of habit and the inertia.
Yeah.
That's part of the job. That's how you have to demonstrate value to consumers and try and create a sense of urgency, try and find a reason to switch, a reason to make the move. And also there will always be some people, your typical early adopters, there'll be folks ready. They like to be different anyway and maybe are ready to try your product, but that's the job.
Yeah. So I wonder if something you said a moment ago about, work has to be supportive of both brand and product, because if it's not, it's dilutive of one, or at best it's neutral, and that's a bad use of resources. And you also talked about this at the top when we were going through the questions, but how do you, you have such a broad purview, and actually I don't want to make it about what you do, but how you see the world and how you see marketing. How would you advise people, based on your breadth of experience and remit, to balance the short and long term? How do you, I suppose it's situational, right? Which is some days it's X and other days it's Y. But
Yeah.
how do you think about that? Do you have a framework for approaching it?
I think for sure it's situational. So in our world, for example, Sunday ticket subscriptions, there's a few months before the season starts and you can't miss it. When you launch a new phone, those first 6 weeks really matter. So there's when you launch a new
The
feature.
short term is the long.
Yeah. So you need, clearly it's situational, and you have to nail the short term. There's no avoiding that. You have to nail the short term. But the short term can be in service of the long haul. And I think that's really important. Like a lot of short terms add up to a long haul. And so you can't have them be separate things. You have to know that it's not a start stop. So you can nail the launch, you can stick the landing, you can get the first 6-8 weeks or that window right. But then you have to keep going, and it's just the start. You have to see the short term as just the start.
Right.
And that's and everyone has to understand that, especially if you're given funds internally to go do something, I'll be very clear with people, look, this is a 5-year plan, or it's a 3-year plan, it's a minimum 3. We're going to commit, we're going to go do this, we're going to iterate and get better at it, and we're going to give it a strong start, but it's just a start.
I wonder if there's a distinction between kind of product launch short term, right, where you got to nail it up front because if you don't, it's over. And kind of just for people who are, for businesses, that is, who are kind of selling the same chocolate chip cookies day in and day out, right? The recipe it's a 100-year-old recipe. It's magnificent. One of the things that our community, the marketing community, has been, faced with is this false narrative and bifurcation of brand and performance. So if we think of, bottom of the funnel marketing as the short term, a conversation I'm hearing from a lot of marketers lately is, as we've been so focused on demand capture, we've forgotten about demand creation, which means that our market is not growing. We may be taking a bigger piece of the pie, but we're not growing the pie. And of course, that's where growth comes from. How for those folks might you think about balancing, let me reframe it, from short and long with bottom of the funnel and top of the funnel?
Again, a question I think that you and I both get a lot. I think it's incredibly important to do both and to not create this division between performance and brand. In my view, brand is performance. It's all performance. So well-run brand campaigns drive extraordinary performance. And I think there's a language change we need to make here in terms of creating this division. I have proven time and time again that when I layer in brand work, it drives greater performance across all the direct response and all the other work. So it needs to be integrated.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but and you going back to something you answered when I asked about how you measure for incrementality.
Yeah.
Can you just share with our listeners a little bit about how methodologically you've proven that?
Well, we'll have control groups, and we'll run, for example, digital only or direct response only, and then layer in brand. And when we see stuff working, and so you'll see the difference. We'll also have control locations, control countries, control cities, depending on where it is, because we have to do this globally. So I will A/B test a lot. So we'll have a lot of really robust and rigorous testing and measurement methodologies in place, and we have an in-house measurement team dedicated to that. I think that's very important. You need experts who are really good, especially in an engineering culture, data-led culture, of having that robust measurement structure in place before you even start. So you're set up to prove out the value. And it won't always, there will be wins, and there'll be, definitely room for improvement. But over time, you start to create a picture that's very, very clear.
I interviewed Kristen Cavallo, who, longtime CEO at Mullen Global, a few months ago, right before she left the industry. And she said something that just, landed super hard with me, which is that she says, data has robbed a lot of CMOs of courage. Coming from, I don't know, if you're not the most data-driven company in the world, you're at the top. Coming from that environment, what do you think? And thinking about marketers again broadly, not just your own experience in your own company, what do you think about what she said?
I think it depends how you define data. So you can sit with anybody in any company and say, look, do you care if I ask people, does this brand matter to me? And they say no. Right? And everybody, any senior exec, including the CFO, will say, yes, of course I care about that. And so, okay, then you care about that. You care about our customers saying, I couldn't care less about this brand, or this brand matters to me, and then we need to invest in that brand. So that is a data point that you can measure. And so it's really about changing the conversation to be about questions like that and bringing in data to show how people feel about your company, how they feel about your products, how they feel about your brand, whether you matter in their lives. Those are important conversations to have internally.
Do you know, I love that question, and nobody has framed it that way. And it is kind of, proving the positive by asking what the reaction would be to the negative. And it makes me think of something, I think you and I might have talked about this when we were together last week, which is for the chief executive, the CFO, the board member, whomever, who doesn't have a marketing experience and who, again, painting with a broad brush, is questioning the role of marketing, questioning the role of the contribution of the CMO, the role of brand. One of the things I can't figure out is how they consistently, because these are very competent people, deny their own lived experience. The shoes they're wearing, the clothes they're wearing, the watch they wear, the bag they carry, the car they drive, the neighborhood they live in, where they go on vacation, blah, blah, blah. As if all those things just happen to be.
I know, but I do think you can also use that as a powerful weapon. I have sat in rooms when I've discussed, for example, the budget I need to establish a premium phone like Pixel, very tough space, and said, listen, what's the car you drive? And why do you drive that car? And why do you pay that versus perfectly good car that will do the same things? You can use that as an opportunity with people to say, look, this is what it takes, because people care deeply about the brands they associate with, especially when you're a very high priced product. So you have to invest in that. I think you can use that as an opportunity, I think.
Which is, I think, a great way into what's going to be our last question, unless we continue to digress, which is good. And it ties to actually your very first answer. Which is, when I asked you what marketing was, you said it was, you'd find it as a human connection. What's the process by which you think marketers and what, as corollaries, chief executives need to understand about how you figure out what is compelling to human beings and what really matters?
Well, I always think of it very simply as our role is to know the user, know the customer, like inside out, then know the magic that your company builds, and the products, whether they're cookies or a phone or a search product or subscription, know them inside out and connect the two in a way that drives that human connection I spoke about, which is why I really care about all work being in service of the brand, because great work should not just make people do something, which is why I believe all companies need more than just, for example, direct response, which is really about do something, take an action. They need work that makes you think and makes you feel.
Yeah.
And if you do work that makes people do something, think something, and feel something well over a period of time, then you're going to drive tremendous business impact, make your product successful, and build a truly deep human connection that's all in service of a strong, trusted brand in the world.
Lorraine Twohill, thank you so much. That should absolutely be the final word.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
as you know,
great.
I love these conversations with you.
Yeah, and I was going to say it up front, but now that we're done with the formal part, I would just want our listeners to know how Lorraine and I first met, which is...
Oh, God. I got so far.
So it's 2011, I think, right? Yeah, it's 2011. Gary Briggs, who was working for you at the time, had been a client of mine, and he introduced us. And I interviewed for what maybe would have been the first CMO at YouTube, right? Would have
so.
been.
Yeah.
Yeah. Needless to say, for anybody who's looked at my LinkedIn, I did not get that job, which in fairness, I couldn't have been less qualified for. But I always say that Lorraine you sent me the nicest, absolutely no note I've ever gotten.
Well, out of that came a great friendship.
Yes.
So
yes,
I think I won either
I
way.
think we both won.
Yes.
Because you would have fired me months later had I gotten the job. Thank you again.
Thanks,
for
Seth.
being
Again,
here.
thank you for everything you do for all of us.
I appreciate it.
Really inspiring.
Thanks for listening. Today's show has been brought to you by RockRT, and you can find the CEO's Guide to Marketing wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to juice that algorithm, smash that subscribe button, and leave us a review so others can find us too. We'll see you next time.